Hi, and welcome back to A Smarter Way to Homeschool. I'm Jessica McCullar, the Customer Experience Manager with Masterbooks. And for this session, I am pleased to be joined by Kate Hannon. Kate is the author of The Principles of Mathematics, Books 1 and 2, Principles of Algebra 2, and Revealing Arithmetic. She has also created academy classes to go along with all of these books, as well as our Algebra 1 and Geometry courses. So thank you so much for talking with me today, Kate.
It's a joy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So kind of just so we get to know you a little bit, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I've been writing and speaking and researching math since 2003. So it's a long time now. I was blessed to be homeschooled and grew up in a Christian family, but we didn't see God in math. And when I finally did as a senior, it was transformational and kind of started me on this journey of trying to share that with others so that people would not miss God's handiwork there. So like you said, I've written a lot of different materials. And I thought I was done after I did the Principles of Mathematics. And I told Masterbooks, unless God sends me someone else to help me, I'm not doing high school. And then God sent me my husband, who has his doctorate from MIT and wanted to write math curriculum. And so we worked on Algebra 2 together. And so that led into high school. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
Thank you for telling us that. It's kind of neat how God works and brings people into our lives that really complement the skills we already have. So that's kind of a neat testimony of how God brought the two of you together and has used you together.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned this where you started to see God in math as a senior, but math is often presented as a neutral subject. It's even in homeschool circles, it's talked about as being, this neutral subject a lot of times, but is that really the case? And then if it's not, how do we find God in math?
That's a great question. And I think it is viewed as neutral by a lot of people. I know for years growing up, I thought it was neutral. 1 + 1 = 2, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, or whether you're an atheist, right? So where is God in that? But when you step back from the facts and you look at why do these facts work, you discover that they're not neutral at all, and that really our worldview plays a part in that in a huge. For example, just think about it in science, because I think it's easier to see, but it's the same thing in math. If you look at a tree, you can agree with a Muslim, Christian, and atheist, all agree on how photosynthesis works and the dimensions of the tree and things that we observe. But the worldview matters. Who created that tree? What's its purpose? All of our worldview affects how we view that tree. And it's that same way in math, that yes, the facts are the facts, but how we view those facts makes a big difference. Where we think those facts came from and why they work. So it is really amazing. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that 1 + 1 always = 2, right? And we can use math outside of a textbook. You would not be worried about teaching your children math if it didn't apply outside of a textbook. But the question is why? And really, it's only a biblical worldview that gives us an explanation for that. It works because God is faithfully, day in and day out, holding creation together in such a consistent and predictable way that we can rely on it to work, and we can describe it on paper and then apply it. And God's given us the ability to explore his creation. He made us in his image, so we're actually able to develop things on paper that end up coinciding with reality, and that's because we're made in the image of God. And so really the Bible gives us a framework for seeing it and transforming it into really, it's part of God's creation, and it's shouting out his praises. There's a verse in Jeremiah I want to just read. Jeremiah 33:25-26 says, "Thus says the Lord, if I have not established my covenant with day and night and the fixed order of heaven and earth." So fixed order would include the consistencies that we record in math, like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Then I will reject the offspring of Jacob and David, my servant. So God's saying, look, you can see from creation, which would include the fixed order that we're describing in math, that I'm a covenant-keeping God. And here he was telling his people he'd be just as faithful to his covenant with them. Math is shouting out at us every time you use math and you see it actually works, that 2 + 2 still is equaling 4. It's shouting out that God is still faithful, that he is still keeping his covenant, and that we better pay attention to what he said, because he is going to be faithful to everything he said in his word. And not only okay, so if God is in math like that, then there's harm in not seeing him. It's not like a neutral zone where you can just ignore that. If we're not giving God the glory, then we're suddenly giving the glory to man or to math itself. I mean, put yourself in a third grader's shoes for just a minute. You're taught fact for years. You spend all this time learning how to work with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but you're not taught why they work. What's your logical conclusion? I know for me as a child, I was like, well, math must just work because it does, or man must be pretty smart because they wrote this textbook and it actually works. Well, that's giving God's glory in math to math itself or to man, which is really naturalism or humanism. And it's subtly disguised in math lessons. I mean, like I said, I was brought up in a Christian homeschooling family, and yet I viewed math as neutral. And as a teenager, I started struggling with, can I really trust the Bible? And I wanted mathematical proof because I'd been taught I can trust math. Whereas I should have been taught, hey, we can only use math because God is real. So math should have been building up my faith. And instead it was subtly planting seeds for humanism and naturalism in me.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Really, when we're teaching math and we're teaching it as if it's a neutral subject, we're teaching our children to kind of worship the creation instead of the creator.
Yeah.
So on that note, how can we use math as a way to worship God?
So, Psalm 19:1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and all of creation is shouting out his praises. And so math itself is shouting out his praises too. It's really, it tends to be isolated, and we think of math over here and science over here. But if you were to try to get a degree in any field of science, you need a lot of math, because math is really the tool that we use to explore his creation. So we should be learning it in a way that is exploring his creation. And as we do that, we're going to find evidence of his care and his wisdom all around us. For example, if you look at a sunflower and you see the seeds are arranged in spirals, well, if you count the number of spirals in each of the two directions that they spiral, the ratio between them is always about the same. And that ratio enables the most number of seeds to fit in a sunflower. So math just helped us see that God created sunflowers to reproduce in the most efficient way possible. I mean, consider his care with something as seemingly insignificant as the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. How much more does he care for us? And so really, as we use math and we explore his creation, and then we see even just the miracle of math itself working and the consistencies that he is still faithfully upholding creation day after day after day, it should cause us to go, wow, God, I can trust you, and to humble ourselves before him in awe and in worship.
Awesome. Is it possible to see our need for the gospel by studying and using mathematics?
Absolutely. I mean, when you realize, okay, God is upholding every atom in this universe, and he's doing it in such a predictable and consistent way, we can describe it with math. And we can describe gravity and build airplanes, and they actually work day after day after day after day. We don't have to worry about whether our flight's on a day gravity is going to operate that way or not, because of how faithful he is. That should cause us to go, okay, I need to pay attention to what he said in his word. It should also humble us, and we realize, okay, I am not the one in charge. Like, he is the one in charge of all of this. I need to bow before him. And as we explore creation, we also see evidence of sin's effects. We see a fallen universe. We explore earthquakes. We use math to do that, to measure earthquakes. And so as we're seeing the fallenness of the world, it reminds us of our sin and how much we need a savior as well.
Great. It's really interesting to think about that math can actually lead us to sharing the gospel with our children, something that I don't think is talked about very often, right? We think, well, we talk about the Bible over here and we talk about math over here. So it's really interesting to see how God created all of creation to work together, and it's all to bring him glory, and math does the exact same thing. So when we see God in and through math, does that impact the way that we should teach math?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't want to teach math as some kind of separate subject when it's really a way of describing God's creation. If you view math as just this neutral man-invented machine, you're going to teach it as this isolated subject, which is what's happened in a lot of math. But if you view it as part of God's creation, you're going to want to teach it in connection with how it applies. And you're going to want the child to really understand how every concept they're learning, why they're learning it, so they understand the purpose for it, and then equip them to really use it as a tool. I mean, God gave Adam back in the garden, he gave him the task of ruling over creation. We have work to do here on this earth, and math is a tool that helps us in that work. And so we want students to be learning math in connection with, okay, this is how you're going to apply it. And so that they're really seeing it as a way of describing that creation. It's kind of like if you were teaching your child to cook, you're not going to do it from a textbook and never let them in the kitchen. You're going to get them in the kitchen, right? And you're going to let them get their hands dirty and actually cook. And in math, we want to do the same thing. We don't just want to say, hey, math is practical. It helps us describe God's creation. Now go learn it from a textbook in isolation all these years. You want to actually let them get their hands dirty in the kitchen, so to speak. You want to have them seeing and applying what they're learning as they go, so that they really can not just be told God's in math and it's a way of describing his creation, but actually experience that and see it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how were you able to kind of weave that into the courses that you authored? Are you able to give us maybe a few examples from the books?
Sure. So one thing I really tried to do was to teach with understanding. So rather than just like rotely memorizing, this is how you do addition, for example, to help the child see the concept in real life. Okay, this is what happens when we add. So if you take 2 of something and you take 2 of something else, you end up with 4. And because God is so faithful and he is in charge of every detail of creation, you can rely on that to always work. So we could write it on a table here, or we could memorize it. And then next time we don't have to actually count it out. And again, you're pointing them back to God's creation. And then as they get into like multi-digit addition, well, we can't possibly memorize everything we ever need to add, right? So we have to find a way to use a limited number of facts. We're not like God. We can't remember everything. So we have to use a limited number of facts in order to help us find the rest. And so our step-by-step process that we learn for addition is really just keeping track of place value for us. And one way that in Principles of Mathematics 1, when the child is reviewing that, because that's for junior high, they've already learned how to add, but we kind of go back and review and try to fill in any gaps in that program as well, is to show them some other ways to add that people have used. Because it was fascinating for me when I first started doing this research to see that when math was first switching over to like a paper exercise, because paper wasn't readily available for a long time, so people would use abacuses and other devices. But when people started doing it more on paper, there were a lot of different methods to add and to multiply and to perform these operations, because God gave man creativity to come up with different ways to keep track of place value, to use that limited number of facts to solve other problems. And looking at some of those others, not to actually like learn them or confuse the child that way, but just to be aware of them, can help a child see, okay, this is just one way to keep track of that place value. And there's nothing mysterious about it. It's men using their God-given ability to describe creation. So I bring in a lot of history into the program, also bring in different mathematicians and how they used math, so students can see, hey, these concepts weren't discovered in isolation, and get that example from, sorry, my phone was buzzing, from creation that way. And then I also really try to bring in why are we learning it? How are we actually going to use this? So for example, in pre-algebra, Principles of Algebra, Principles of Mathematics 2 is a pre-algebra program. So as we're getting into X's and Y's, rather than just dealing with X and Y, they're given examples of what X could represent and what Y could represent. So they're seeing that from daily things like, okay, the flour and sugar that we're putting in a recipe, to things in different fields, like different business applications, science applications, kind of incorporating all that. Music, and when we look at fractions, they look at quarter notes and half notes and how we apply that in music. So they're seeing math as a useful tool. They're being equipped to use it that way. And then they're also being pointed back to the Lord at every step, both in math's ability to work and also in, just as we look at creation. So like they look at the sunflower example I talked about earlier, earthquakes, the cells in our body. Do you know that the cells in our body, as they grow, that we can look at how the ratio between the surface area and the volume, and as it grows, if God didn't have the cell break off into two different cells, we would be in trouble. Okay. But he does, he has it break off. So like we see his design everywhere, and it's math that helps us explore it. So they get to actually explore a lot of different aspects of creation in that. They look at a giraffe and the marvelous way God designed a giraffe in the Algebra 2 program. And then there's just a lot of like real life and business problems as well, to just really make sure that they're prepared then to use this tool for God's glory in whatever field he calls them to.
That's awesome. I love that you really brought in the real life part, because for students to have an interest in what they're learning, they don't want to be learning these abstract concepts that seem like they don't connect to life at all, And so bringing it in and saying, these are concepts you need that you're going to use your entire life, or how we can, like you said, see math in creation and connect that with God. It makes it, there's a reason for why we're studying this. It's not just because I have to get that credit on my transcript, or because mom and dad said I have to do this. There's actually a reason beyond that. So that's really neat to have that in the books.
Mm-hmm.
So the books that you've authored really start around junior high and move up into high school. So could you give maybe some practical tips to parents of younger children that are watching us today on how they can help their children to see God in math really from an early age?
Sure. Well, at the early level, a lot is caught in math. Like as you go through life, if you're pointing out, oh, we can use numbers here to describe this, and then connecting that back to God, like God gave Adam the ability to name the animals. We're naming the quantities around us. We can do that. God made us in his image. Just little comments as you're using math and pointing that out to your child can go a long way in building that foundation from the beginning. You can have them like try to count the hairs on their head. They can't. But God knows the number of hairs on our head, how much greater he is than us. Just going back to that as we go. If you're teaching them about spiders and how spiders have 8 legs, and then you find a spider that's missing a leg, you can talk about, we're using numbers to help us describe and categorize God's creation. We categorize insects with 8 legs. Here's spiders. One is missing it. We live in a fallen world. We need Jesus. You're right there at the gospel again. And it's those everyday conversations as you're going through life to really help that child see math as part of God's handiwork and see the gospel. And while I don't have a curriculum for the elementary, Masterbooks has published Revealing Arithmetic, which is designed to really just give moms the tools they need for those younger levels. So it's arranged by concept. So if you're teaching fractions, you look at the fractions chapters, and you'll have bulleted out ideas of just different things you can do to kind of bring in that perspective with your child. And there's also an Academy video course that goes with it. And I designed the video course to just be like some short videos that would really help moms get the biblical worldview on the different concepts and details, so that as they're doing those everyday conversations, they're equipped and they understand and feel confident in helping. Because the arithmetic's really important. It's the foundation that we're going to build on as we go forward.
Absolutely. So Revealing Arithmetic would be a really great resource for those families that have the younger students, but they're wanting to make sure they really get that biblical foundation and start out with that understanding that math works because God is faithful.
Yes.
Absolutely. So kind of a wrap up for today is, why is teaching math with this foundation of the fear of the Lord a smarter way for students to learn math?
Well, the Bible says in Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And so when we start any subject in awe of God, we're going to see it as it really is. And when you see something as it really is, it makes a whole lot more sense. And I've seen that over and over again with students with math. When they understand why they're learning what they're learning, it's like, okay, I can do this. Think about how frustrated your child would be if you really did try to teach them cooking, for like 8 or 9 years just from a textbook, and they never went into the kitchen. Or if you tried to teach them how to drive just from a textbook and you never put them behind a wheel, like they're going to think they hate cooking. They're going to think they hate driving, and they've never really done either. And so I've seen so many kids hate math, and it's really just that they don't understand why they're learning what they're learning, and they don't really see what math is. And so when you show them that, it's like a lightning bolt. It opens up and makes sense out of it. Now, certainly everybody's gifted differently. That doesn't mean everybody's going to go on to be a rocket scientist, but it makes it so much easier to try to understand those concepts when we see them as they truly are. Alfred North Whitehead said, "There can be nothing more destructive of true education than to spend long hours in the acquirement of ideas and methods which lead nowhere." And that's what sadly happened in math in a lot of ways, is people are spending hours trying to learn something that to them leads nowhere. And you don't really find out about where it leads until you're already in a technical field in college and several years into that. Most people have given up by then. And to show them that earlier on, though, then they have a purpose to what they're learning, and they're being encouraged in the Lord, as they're studying math. If they're going through a hard time in life, they can be reminded, hey, God is still on his throne, even though it doesn't feel like it, even though it feels like my life is out of control. Math is still working. God is still in charge. Nothing is going to stop him. It should be that joyful encouragement as they're going through life. And when we're not starting with that fear of the Lord again, we're really giving humanistic and naturalistic seeds. And so it's very much a smarter way in terms of eternity to be teaching it from that biblical worldview.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was just so awesome to talk with you about this today. I know the first time I heard you talk on this topic was several years ago, and I was just blown away. And I know that everything that you're sharing is such a blessing to the homeschool community, and it's refreshing to hear this truly biblical perspective on math and how we can really see God in math, and it's not separate. All the things that we teach, even math, can be taught through our biblical worldview. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So for everyone watching us today, if you would like to see any of Kate's courses or her academy options, you can visit masterbooks.com and masterbooksacademy.com. Thank you.